Ever find the Bible confusing or intimidating to you? Hey, I'm Matt, and it certainly can be difficult for me. Part of the reason for that is the Bible's unlike any other literary book in the world. So during this series, I want to share some basics with you that can help you better understand the Bible. First, you need to know that the Bible is a compilation of God's wisdom and truth. It's a history, if you will, of His relationship with humanity, and it's a record of His love for us. It tells us who He is, and it tells us what He values. So being able to understand the Bible is going to help you better understand God. That's the point. But that's also the problem. It's often frustrating trying to make sense out of what we read. So let's start with something that may not seem obvious: how the Bible came to be. If you don't understand how we got the Bible, it's really easy to misunderstand what's in the Bible. The way you got your Bible is not the way we got the Bible. If you're like me, somebody gave you a Bible at some point in your life, and it was a big book with maps and notes and references and an index and a glossary, and all the sections had titles. And then you were told, well, this is God's holy word, it's all true. And if you ask, how do you know? They said, because it says it's all true, right? So you should live by it. Most of all, don't sit anything on it, and that was the end of the discussion. That was all the information we got. So you may be surprised to learn that the story of how we got the Bible doesn't begin in the beginning of the Bible in Genesis. The story of how we got the Bible actually begins much, much later. The Bible, the way we have it, wasn't even a thought in people's minds in the first century. When Jesus came on the scene, it wasn't the goal of His followers to create the Bible. That wasn't even on their radar. The Bible would have never existed except for an event that happened. See, when Jesus died and was buried, there was no church, there was no Bible, there weren't even any Christians at that point. What prompted and inspired people to write these accounts and letters and collect all these documents that ended up in the Bible? Well, it was the event that we call the resurrection. That's why they ended up doing that. These writers in the New Testament documented the life of Jesus because the story of Jesus didn't end on a Roman cross. Something extraordinary had happened, they had witnessed it, and these writers believed it was worth documenting for future generations. So for centuries, think about this, for centuries, these individual accounts and letters written by people like Peter and John and Matthew and Mark and Luke and Paul, well, they were copied individually, and then they were circulated among Christians and churches. So all the Christians and all the churches, they didn't have all the documents together. And then in the 4th century, after a few hundred years of persecution, Roman Emperor Constantine lifted the religious ban in the Roman Empire, allowing Christianity to be legal. Now think about that for a second. It was now legal for scholars to come out of the shadows and to begin to work together, gathering up all these valuable documents that had been hidden away and copied meticulously and passed down from generation to generation, often, if you read your history, at the cost of the lives of Christians. And in a really fascinating twist of history, the very empire that crucified Jesus funded the collection and copying of these documents, so that for the first time ever, the Jewish scriptures, that's what we call the Old Testament, and these New Testament writings, for the first time ever, they were combined together and called the Bible. So, the Bible is often referred to as a book, but it's not a book. It's actually a collection of 66 different pieces of literature that were written by 40 different authors over a span of more than 1,500 years. And here's what's crazy. These 66 documents tell one single compelling story of God moving and proving His love for humanity. So what we call the Old Testament, or the Jewish scriptures, that focuses on the historical and spiritual journey of the Jewish people. That context is important. Those documents explain God's original purpose for both the world and humanity. They explain how sin broke us and broke the world, how sin broke our relationship with God, and how God began to clean up what we messed up. That He started by establishing this special relationship with the nation of Israel and deciding He was going to use that group of people to reveal Himself again to the world. And then you get to the New Testament writers, and they tell us how Jesus came to communicate and to demonstrate what God was like. They give us eyewitness accounts of His life, His death, His resurrection. They explain to us how Jesus restores and renews our relationship with God. They help us understand how to live out Jesus' teachings and the change that God creates in our lives when we choose to live by His design. And all of these documents are designed to help you know, experience, and interact with a personal God who loves you. So, now that you know the short version of the backstory of the Bible, well, how do you read it where it makes more sense? Well, I'm going to give you a few starter tips in session 2.